Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Palace Theatre in Kilmarnock. With a great turnout upstairs as well. This has been great. My name's Gary Parker, and I just want to welcome you all. Thank you for coming. And just a quick thing, just on housekeeping. If you could put your mobile phones off, please, would be very good. You'll usually go off 5 minutes after the start. Now, your escape routes, there's stewards here that will take you out. The doors are behind, and you make your way out to the Salvation Army. General rule of thumb is that any meeting that I tend to be at, I'm out the door first. If you follow me, you'll be absolutely fine. Okay. The format for tonight, it's just to let you know, first of all, we've got these voting boxes that's coming round. It's just to get a feel for how you feel about the referendum just now and see how we can sway you before the end of the night. Hopefully that would be nice, and we'll put them round at the end. So we'll get these boxes with yes on it. You've got your wee thing here, don't know, no and yes. If you could put that in the box, how you feel just now, we can do a comparison at the end, and that's a good help to us. So the format of tonight, quite straightforward. You'll have seen these things before. We've got 4 excellent speakers tonight, and they're each going to give you a bit of an insight into their vision of an independent Scotland. And then what we'll do is we'll move on to some questions and answers. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the first speaker. I often call him the secret weapon of the Yes campaign. He doesn't know that, but he is, and he's often been critical of people getting into the bun fight. So there's not going to be any bun fights tonight. We're going to have a nice debate and answer all your questions. And apparently I've heard as well that he's willing to answer questions at the end of the meeting on Doctor Who. Somebody told me that today. He knows all the answers to Doctor Who, so if you can't stump him on that, you may stump him on that. So if you could please give a nice East Ayrshire welcome to our first speaker tonight, please, Patrick Harvie.
I'm very grateful for the introduction, but I'm sorry to disappoint any fellow sci-fi fans in here that when it comes to Doctor Who trivia, I'm afraid my least favourite Labour MP, Tom Harris, is a far greater expert than I am, so I'm going to have to defer to his judgment on that one, not on any other subject, but only on that. I'd like to thank you for the invitation to come and speak, and just to say that some of the public meetings that I've been to around Scotland, and I've tried to get around the country as much as I can over the last few months, and over the next few months to come there'll be a lot more of it. The public meetings that I've taken part in during this referendum have been really exciting, often really inspiring ideas, and it's, I think, reflective of something that's happening in Scotland in the last year or two as we get closer and closer to making this decision. A decision on a question which has been a bit of a dividing line in Scottish politics for a long, long time. But an issue that for many people has been a wee bit abstract, I think. The question, do you support the idea of Scottish independence in theory, some point in the far off, dim and distant future? That's the way a lot of people have seen it. But the closer we get to polling day, and the closer the polls start to look, and they are starting to look close, the more this is becoming a real question. Not do you support the general idea in the abstract, but actually, right now, are we going to do this? Are we actually going to make this decision for real and turn Scotland into an independent country? It becomes a fundamentally different question. It's forcing people to ask not just where should power be exercised, London or Edinburgh, or actually right throughout our country, in all communities up and down the country. Not just where should power be exercised, but actually what kind of country do we want to be? And it's been decades since most of the political spectrum has been offering people anything more than variations on a theme. The chance for this generation to ask and answer a defining question: what kind of country do we want to be? What kind of economy do we want to run, and in whose interests? What kind of future are we going to hand on to the next generation? That's a rare opportunity, and it's been stimulating such creativity in Scotland. Not just among campaigners on both sides, also among organisations that have sprung up like National Collective, think tanks like the Reid Foundation, neutral organisations, some of the international development organisations who are not campaigning for a yes or a no, but want to ask, what can Scotland contribute to international development? poverty organisations, who are not campaigning for a yes or a no, but who are saying, what can Scotland do to close the gap between rich and poor and start turning around the decades-long drift toward this neoliberal, rightward-leaning politics that Britain doesn't seem able to change, but Scotland could. This has been one of the most creative periods in Scottish politics, and it's such a far cry from, do you remember this phrase, Scotland on pause? We were told when this debate began, when it became clear there was going to be a referendum, that Scotland was on pause, Scotland was on hold. Well, maybe sometimes the Scottish Parliament doesn't rise above the he said, she said, kind of sterile posturing. But Scotland, the national debate that's moved outside of Hollywood and is taking place in rooms like this, in pubs, in living rooms, in schools, in universities, in workplaces right up and down the country, the national debate that our country is engaging in is so far from Scotland on pause, it's unbelievable. It's a creative period of new ideas bubbling over. I think Scotland is seeing such a creative period that actually, can you imagine what we would do if we turned around on September the 19th and said, look at all these fantastic ideas we've got, and yet we've not taken the opportunity to put them into practice. If Scotland votes yes, I won't be waving flags. I don't really care much for flags, Saltire or Union flag. I won't be singing patriotic songs. I'm not really one for patriotism in either national identity, British or Scottish. I'm not doing this out of national identity, and I'm not a nationalist. I don't think you have to be a nationalist to be driven toward a desire to change your society for the better. It's that opportunity for change that I think Scotland needs to grasp. Most of the public meetings by this point tend to be attracting a majority of yes voters, and this one might be the same. In many ways, I want to offer a compelling vision to people who are undecided, but it's equally important to offer something to people who are already committed to voting yes. Because you are the people who are going to have to go out over the next few months on the doorsteps and reach out to people who are yet to decide. And the most important message that I want you to take away tonight, if you're already committed to voting yes, to working for a yes vote, I want you to think about the kind of people who are not yet convinced. They've not been convinced by anything they've heard yet on either side. And they're the most important people in this debate. They're the people who can swing it one way or the other. Please let's not allow them to think that this is simply about rejection of anything. It's not for me. I mean, I've got a great deal that I dislike about the Westminster political landscape, a political set of institutions that couldn't get rid of an unelected House in Parliament after 100 years of trying. There's a great deal to dislike about the UK political landscape, but frankly, the Scottish political landscape isn't perfect. The Scottish Parliament is not a perfect embodiment of an inclusive, participative democracy that I think Scotland deserves. This is not about rejection. It's not about blaming anyone. It's not about blaming a political party we don't like. It's not about blaming Westminster as a culture or the rest of the UK in terms of its population or their attitudes. No, this has to be positively about taking the opportunity and taking responsibility for ourselves. I don't think we can culturally take responsibility for making our lives better, for making our society better, for making our economy better and fairer, if we hook that onto blaming other people. So let's make sure that the next few months, this debate is one that's characterised by taking responsibility for ourselves. I think Scotland is ready to do that. I think we've had far too long, we all know that we've had far too long of blaming other people, of pretending that it's Westminster's fault, or it's London's fault, or it's the government's fault, or even that it's big business's fault. There is fault, but part of the fault is our own sense of responsibility. This debate has to be one about choosing to take responsibility ourselves. And I think that message, not one of blame, but one of positively choosing to take responsibility, is the one that will resonate with people, the one that will make sense to people, the one that will appeal to those who are yet undecided. We've got the chance not just to start closing the gap between rich and poor, to start bringing democratic accountability back into our economy, where it's been handed away to the markets and to the business world by government after government after government. Not just building a nation of peace that represents the values of global justice and sustainability. I think we've actually got the ability, the opportunity, to build a democratic culture where every community has got the sense of agency, the sense of power, the sense that they are taking decisions about their own lives, not blaming somebody else and resenting somebody else at whatever level of government for getting things wrong. So let's go out there over the next 4 months and inspire people with the opportunity to think not just about whose fault it is that we're not perfect yet, but with the sense of responsibility by taking this step into an independent Scotland. Because let's just imagine the thrilling and frightening moment that we'll have if we actually wake up on the 19th and think, bloody hell, we actually did it. We debated it for so long. We debated it for so long, but now it's real. People on both sides of this debate, even those who voted no, even those who right now are undecided and might still vote no. If we've won our independence, that's thrilling and frightening, and it should be both. It should be both exciting and frightening. That moment when we all have to come together and make it work. That's the opportunity to bring the country together in that sense of excitement and thrill that will come from realising it's down to us now. From that moment on, we don't get the chance to blame other people. We have to make it work. We have to come together in a sense of responsibility and creativity. And then we'll have the chance to put all of these ideas that have been bubbling through Scottish public life in this national debate that we've been having. We'll have the chance to put those ideas into practice. So I look forward with you to being thrilled, excited, and a wee bit frightened on September the 19th. Thank you all for being here, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Patrick. That was very good. And now we're going to move on to our next speaker. It's a portfolio when you work in government, I feel doesn't really get an awful lot of attention, but yet it's one of the most important ones that you get when you're the Minister for Culture. I know that Gordon Brown and George Robertson don't believe that Scotland has its own culture, it's British culture. Well, I'd have to disagree with that, I'm afraid. And I'm sure when you're finished hearing this lady speak, you'll feel that too. What I like about her is that she always brings class to debate and very interesting to listen to. So I'd like you to welcome, please, Fiona Hyslop.
Very much for that kind of introduction. When I was driving in today, I saw the sign Kilmarnock, the Creative Place. And last time I was in this hall was when Kilmarnock hosted the Creative Place Awards. They got to host it because they'd won it the year before. It's a bit like Eurovision, but people actually vote for you. And I was particularly impressed that even the football team had managed to get in on the act. And the fact that you managed to get Marie Osmond to come and sing Paper Roses as part of the football team celebration was a real coup. I have Ayrshire connections. I was brought up in South Ayrshire. My mother taught, I was a nurse tutor at Cross House, and my stepsister, was an inspector here in Kilmarnock, but I'm sure this is a law-abiding audience, so none of you have got into trouble there. Today, I want to reflect on the 3 anniversaries. I want to reflect on them and then move on to some of the case for Scottish independence. The first one to remark on is it's the 20th anniversary of the death of John Smith, the former leader of the Labour Party. Today also marks 15 years on since the start of the Scottish Parliament, when Winnie Ewing uttered the famous words, "The Scottish Parliament adjourned on the day 25th of March in the year 1707 is hereby reconvened." And then the third day anniversary is to mark it's the International Nurses Day, and I'll remark on all of these points. The first one, And I am an SNP member. I'm a member of the SNP government. It's the SNP government that set out Scotland's future in the White Paper and also is implementing the referendum. But the independence case is far more than the SNP. You see that on the stage today. And I want to reflect on those of you who are members of the Labour Party. And Independent Scotland is as much yours as anybody else's, and you can shape that. And I think in reclaiming the Labour Party, there are many who want to see that progress going forward. And independence is deeper and broader than any one political party. And it's important that we reflect on that point. The second point is about the Scottish Parliament. 15 years, it seems a long time for those of us that were elected in 1999. What a tremendous privilege to be elected to the first Scottish Parliament. And we have achieved a number of things. I was the government minister who took through the bill that abolished tuition fees, that restored free education in this country of hope and opportunity. We got rid of the expensive PFI. We implemented world-leading climate change, although Patrick would be the first to say we haven't gone far enough and we should do more. And a whole host of health issues that we've implemented that have helped this country forward. And many of these things, yes, have been implemented by my government, but also in previous governments as well. So when we have had some limited powers to do things, we've used them wisely and well, and it shows that we can implement policies when we have the powers to do so. And the third point I want to reflect on is International Nurses Day. Well, why do I do that? Well, I was brought up with the health service. My dad was a GP and my mum, as I said, was a nurse tutor. They both ended up in Ayr Hospital on the same night, a year past Easter. In fact, they had his and hers ambulances. They were joking a bit later on. The damn thing is that I think everybody came to see them because my mum must have trained all the nurses in Ayrshire in the hospital, and most of the folk who were in there had been patients of my dad. But so I've been brought up with health service, and I believe it also reflects who we are as a nation in terms of our belief in public services. We believe in public services. That's why in some of the things we've done, we've managed to make sure that we've brought things back in-house to the public health service. We've got rid of prescription charges that were a tax on the sick, and we've done a number of things, the free eye tests and all the rest of it, free personal care. But it shows you what we can do in belief in the public services. And I think when we reflect about the choices that are facing us going forward, it's the choice of two futures. It's not just independence versus status quo, that's the wrong way to look at it. Because there are certainties and uncertainties with both choices. With independence, there's things you know can happen, and we've set that out in Scotland's Future in the White Paper, and if you haven't had a chance to look at it, please do. But there are uncertainties, things that we don't know about, but there's uncertainties also with the Westminster system. What tax rate do you think we're going to have 5-year, 10-year time? Do you think we'll have public services and the belief in the NHS that we currently have in Scotland, when we've seen the steady privatisation under a number of Westminster governments down south? And the more they privatise things, the more there's less money available for the Scottish Bloc to invest in our area. Take tuition fees. It's why the SNP MPs took the opportunity that they did vote against tuition fees in England. Why? Because had they gone through, which they did, it meant there's less money available for Scotland in our block grant. So there are consequences also of a no vote. But I want to look at the yes vote and what that means. Yes is a vote for the possible and for what we can do as a nation. I know, and I see it day in, day out, we have got the capability in our people, we've got the capability in our resources. We need the energy of the powers to do something with that. And why do we need to do that? Because this country, however good it might be, could be so much better. And it's not just for us, it's for those that are in need, it's those in the future generations to come. And look at the strengths that Scotland has. And it's not just me that's saying this. Financial Times did an analysis and showed in terms of, and acknowledged our argument, that the public finances of an independent Scotland would actually be stronger than the rest of the UK. We would be one of the top 20 in terms of GDP per head. That comes from the Financial Times. In terms of our other aspects, Standard & Poor's, I used to work in finance, they're an economic and credit rating agency, and quote, they said, even excluding North Sea output, Scotland would qualify for our highest economic rating. So where does this wealth come from? Well, even without oil, We've got exports, strong exporting base, could be better. We've got life sciences, we've got food and drink, £13 billion of a turnover, manufacturing, 15 billion of a turnover. We've got other areas of financial management. And we've got 25% of Europe's offshore wind and tidal potential. At a time when energy security in the world is so important, climate change is so important, we could be leaders in this area if we had the powers to do so. And yes, let's take oil. Why are we in a country that has so much wealth? Why are we in a situation where we have so much poverty? Why do we have food banks? Why do we have so many children and increasing numbers living in poverty? And yes, oil is an asset to this country, but we should see it as a bonus. We should see it as a bonus. So why is it that we don't do what Norway's done? Other countries would have taken the income from the natural assets and invested it, and that country now has an oil fund worth £500 billion, and they have a quality of life that we can only envy. So we can't. Has Scotland got what it takes financially? Of course we've got what it takes financially. So the issue is, should we do it, and why should we do it? And the should part of it, I think, is, as Patrick has said, the most exciting part of what we can do. I've been working the last 4 years talking to governments about what Scotland is, the character of Scotland, what kind of global citizen we would be, and the international routes that we would take to get there. And I can't emphasise how much we should understand that the eyes of the world are watching Scotland. Because if you were to have a new democratic country in the northwest corner of Europe, what would it look like? You could take the best of the stuff that you've got just now, and some of the social union we've talked about in other areas, but you could take the best of what the world has got to offer in terms of issues like childcare, in terms of economic development, in terms of what they do with the renewable energy, and the specialisms that they could have. And that's what's exciting about Scotland, is we can build that better place, and we can do it on values and positions that we want. Because remember, going back to that democracy, the arguments, if you look at all the times that Scotland has voted for a government in Westminster that we didn't want, half the time since the Second World War, governments elected that the people of Scotland did not vote for. Policies imposed like the poll tax, policies imposed like the bedroom tax. And yes, I'm pleased in the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government, we've managed to mitigate the worst successes of the bedroom tax. But you can only abolish it if you have independence. You can only have the welfare system you want to get rid of the universal credit system that coming in to tackle some of the really divisive welfare policies that are coming in from the Westminster Government, if we've got those powers ourselves. And I don't think we can wait. This is it, folks. I don't want to have a look at a prospect of 50 to 100,000 more children in poverty as a result of the changes that are happening in a Westminster government that we didn't vote for. So I believe that we will have peace and prosperity. I think we would be a peaceful nation. We're not, as a country of 5 million, going to try and have the trappings of a world power. That's not what we're about. We don't need to be that way. Neither do other countries of a similar size. And I do not believe that this country needs or should have weapons of mass destruction that cost a fortune and are targeted at nobody that we can consider to be enemies. So I do think that we can have a better place to spend our money on our children rather on defence systems we don't need. We can afford things, we can do them. We've got an income tax system, the East Kilbride. We've got 2 out of the 9 pension systems are already operating in Scotland. We can afford our pensions in a much better position than the rest of the UK. So we can do this. The issue is, can we shape that new country? And I want to also reflect on why we must do it, because there are consequences of a no vote. It is a choice of 2 futures. There are certainties and uncertainties in both. I do think that in terms of the 290,000 jobs dependent on foreign investment, that many of them are here because of our membership of the EU, and that should continue. I think the risk to any membership in the EU is an in-out referendum by David Cameron. I think that's something, again, in terms of reflection, people will have different views on this, and I understand that, but that is something that people might want to consider going forward. And in terms of the accountability, we can build something that we can be proud of, and we can do it ourselves. You've got the chance to have Scotland's future in your hands in September the 18th. These things and these opportunities don't come round very often. If you look at our reflection, it's a once in a lifetime generation in many respects in terms of people's opportunity. And I remember 1997. I remember because I was pregnant with my oldest son during the 1997 elections. I stood against Alistair Darling, he won. But my son, who was born shortly after, is now 16. He will get his first vote ever this September. And yes, I've spoken as a politician, and yes, I've spoken as a government minister, but I'm also a mother. I've got 3 children. And I'm not saying that people on the other side of this debate don't care about the future of children either. I do believe, however, opportunity, hope and confidence, the art of the possible, can only happen with the powers of independence. And what I want, I have a daughter who's 18, who gets her first votes this year as well. What I want for them and for my 9-year-old as well is to grow up in a country of the art of the possible. Just because we're geographically small doesn't mean we have to think small. We can think big. We can think about the art of the possible. And I want them to grow up in a country that sets its mind and its task to what it can do, rather than be a country and a people that are told what they can't do. And I believe that if we grab that opportunity, and if we take our country forward together, and it will be all of us that will build that newly independent country, we should and could face the future with confidence, face that future of hope and possibility, have our eyes firmly on the horizon of what we can do, and also our feet firmly on our ground, and know where we come from as a people in our values, public health service, in terms of our public services. But wouldn't that be a wonderful opportunity? And do not wake up on September the 19th and say, do you know, I wish I'd done it. This is your chance to do it. And this is your chance to vote yes for yourselves, your future, your family, and your country.
Thank you, Fiona. Now, the Yes campaign is built up of not so much political parties, but lots of groups. And one of them, of course, is Women for Independence. And the next speaker works tirelessly for Women for Independence. And, you know, there's a lot of people in this campaign, we try to say, to go the extra mile when trying to, you know, persuade a no voter. Well, next speaker's went one stage further. She's moved one into her house. He's a Tory, and he's called David, I believe, and I'm scared to ask her what his second name is, so I'm leaving it there. So you can't really question that too much, but if you wondered who's going to win the yes and no debate in our household, I've heard that through the grapevine that you know, you get the posters for the windows and you get yes, no. Well, if you put them both at the front of the house, you're going to come across as somebody who's really confused. Well, in this case, she's got the front window, David's got the back window. So I'd like to introduce the next guest, please. It's Natalie McGarry.
Well, that was quite a lengthy introduction there. I'm not really sure what to start. You put me at a disadvantage by telling everyone I live with a Tory at the very beginning. It's a privilege to be here in Kilmarnock, and what can I say? I'm on a panel with some of the best and greatest politicians of our age and previous age. No offence. Obviously, Jim's working very, very hard, and I'm privileged to be sitting next to him there. A really interesting article, the Telegraph this week. Perhaps that's because I have a Tory partner, and I call it the Tory Graph. He quite likes it, but it might be my fault for reading it. But it was interesting all the same, and I'm surprised actually I picked my jaw up off the floor in order to be able to speak to you about it tonight. It was an article about the squeezed middle, and I use those really annoying air quotations very deliberately. We were talking about middle-income households who have seen their income squeezed and eroded by massive hikes in inflation and the cost of living, and coupled with the flatlining of wages in the last few years. Now, these are all reasonable points, and I'm sure there's many people in the room that have suffered from that as well. However, to use the example that the Telegraph chose, they used a man who is on £120,000 per year. He was bemoaning having to swap his Ocado deliveries for shopping at Tesco. And he couldn't remember the last time he'd had a city break. And then he went on to say he was paying £45,000 in school fees for his children. Now, just put aside for a minute that he's in the top 5% of earners in the UK, and think his children's school fees are 3 times what a full-time person earning the living wage, not the minimum wage, but the living wage can take home in a year. Whilst families in work are increasingly reliant on additional support to make ends meet, at the top of the economic food chain, we have people like this gentleman who said, people in housing schemes might think I'm mad. Mad! Privileged, patronising and absolutely out of touch with the reality of economic circumstances for people in work, out of work, through no fault of their own, through illness, through child caring, through caring responsibilities, and because they simply can't find a job in this economic circumstance. Since 2008, the City of London, the prospectors, the bankers have all seen the economy recover for them. Well, that economic recovery has been built on the backs of people that are the most vulnerable and the poorest in our society. We live in the 4th most unequal country in the world. Just last week, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation found that there's been an increase of 56% of the number of people in work, that's in work, who are having to rely on housing benefit in order to make ends meet, because wages don't meet the cost of living, where the minimum wage under successive governments has failed to meet inflation, where the difference, had it met inflation, is almost £700 for working families, and where the link between pensions and earnings has been broken. This is a country where the Trussell Foundation and others are providing food to families, some out of work, some in work, who are having to make a choice between eating and heating. I think that the reliance on food banks is a scourge in any society, because people might say that GDP and economically we are a wealthy country. Well, we are not a rich country when a rich country or society when people suffer the indignity of food banks. And yet, under devolution, under the economic straitjacket of devolution as well, we've managed to achieve so much. We have managed to demonstrate that where we have the powers that we fought for in 1997, we can make progressive choices. We can make different choices, compassionate choices, and choices which carry the democratic endorsement of people in Scotland. I'm not going to say there haven't been various disagreements in the Scottish Parliament, and I'm sure Fiona and Patrick could tell you more about them. But what we have seen is much unanimity of purpose. There's been a rolling back of the NHS reforms, the protection of the NHS budget, the right to free personal care under the Liberal and Labour administration, the abolition of student tuition fees, of prescription charges, and the mitigation of the abhorrent bedroom tax. And these are just some of the more high-profile examples of where we as a society have chosen a different, more cooperative approach to policy and politics. So we've shown that we can make devolution work, but we don't have the powers that we need to make the bigger choices, to act fully as the government that the people of Scotland have told us they want to be. We know from successive social attitude surveys that over 2/3 of people in Scotland want full control of our welfare budget and full control of our tax revenues. Yet at the moment we only have a tiny percentage of these, and there are no concrete proposals from any of the parties supporting a no to change that. We have total control of our NHS, and don't let anyone tell you that a yes threatens the NHS. Our NHS has been separate from its very inception. But we have no control over the budget which is allocated to it by Westminster. We have total control over our education system, which means that we can choose to offer free tuition at university. It's a sector which has 4 of the world's best universities in it. But, again, we don't have control of the budget allocated to that by Westminster. As the English NHS becomes increasingly privatised and government spending on English education is lessened by switching the burden of cost onto the brightest students in the UK, the budget allocated to universities here and there is shrinking. So, Fiona mentioned it earlier, we have a big decision to make in Scotland, and we are choosing between 2 definite futures. We can continue as we are, with budget cuts, with 1 in 4 of our children in poverty, and with Oxfam and the Poverty Action Group saying that that will rise exponentially if we continue with the current Conservative Labour. We have no offered control over the areas that people in Scotland have told us that they want. We have a Westminster system, which Patrick touched on, where it's not unusual for someone in the House of Lords to turn up, sign a script and walk away with £300 in their back pocket. That is so out of touch with the reality of lives of people, not just in Scotland, but right across the UK. The difference is we have a choice here. And I'm sorry if anybody came expecting some Braveheart rhetoric. I think the next bit that I'm going to go down is maybe more about train spotting, actually. Because we can choose a different path. We can choose power, we can choose responsibility, we can choose democracy, and we can choose confidence in ourselves. We can choose full control of our natural resources. We can apply and nurture the huge wealth of talents that we have in our people and in our education system. And we can use that to rejuvenate the entrepreneurial spirit and diversify our industries, to cultivate the 25% of Europe's natural energy and to sell and trade that technology to the rest of the world. We can choose to create a childcare system which will demonstrate our commitment to early years education and acknowledges that education and meaningful, fulfilling employment are amongst the best tools we can offer to help families and children out of poverty. We can choose to view the welfare state as a social investment in our people. This is our chance to ensure that women are at the forefront of any future constitution and that the thread of social justice and equality runs throughout. These are the stones on which we need to build our new democracy. But don't be fooled, independence is not utopia, and we shouldn't pretend it is. Our legacy of some of the poorest health and outcomes in Europe won't change overnight, and many of the problems in our society are of our own making. But they are our responsibility and ours to fix it. This is our chance to say enough is enough, to take the power into our own hands and trust that we can use our resources as the 14th richest country in the world to the benefit of our people. This is our time, it's our moment. Let's have faith that we can do it, and let's all work together to build this better country.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Now, we're on to our final speaker, and there's actually no introduction needed, so here he is. No, he really doesn't need any introduction, but I did want to just call a moment to this year. He produced one of my favourite TV moments. It was on the debate with George Galloway, and the best way to put it was he made George Galloway look like George Galloway. So, but just a little bit to touch on how popular he is. I was doing the doorstep thing in Saltcoats, and the chap might be here tonight actually. He was cutting his grass and he was telling me how he was voting no, definitely voting no, 100% voting no. And then we got talking. For some reason, his name came into the conversation. He says, "Is he voting yes?" I says, "Absolutely." He says, "You've got my attention." So I says, "Right, are you coming along to our meeting then?" And he says, "Yeah, I'll be along to your meeting." So he was going to come with his dad. Don't know if you're here, but if you are here, glad you came. But anyway, if you're interested in his politics, his book is In Place of Fear, is on sale outside. But in the meantime, let me introduce you to Jim Sillars.
Mr. Chairman and ladies and gentlemen, I am, unlike Patrick, not the least bit frightened about a yes vote on the 18th of September. I'm 76 and I can't wait. And the reason I'm campaigning at my age, because I should really be sitting at home, watching the television, is that I'm campaigning for my grandchildren and your grandchildren. I've got 10 grandchildren, And at the end of primary 7, I've written each one of them a grandpa letter, just to give them some advice. There's a tendency for these wains to listen to their grandpa rather than their mother and father, just the same as me when I was their age. And I've had to tell them that if Scotland remains part of the United Kingdom, the best advice I can give them is to get the best skill base they can get and the best academic qualifications if they go to university, in order to be able to escape to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, or the United States. And it's for other folks' grandchildren that I am campaigning as well. I go into areas of what's known as deprivation, and I find it heartbreaking because I see a lassie with a wain in the pram and I think, what future does that wain have in our society at the present time? And the only conclusion I can reach, and you can reach, if we're honest, is that it doesn't have any future whatsoever. Because we have 250,000 children born to fail in our society. Way back in, when I was an MP in South Ayrshire, there was a debate in what was then the Scottish Grand Committee on a document called Born to Fail. Born to Fail in 1973. And we've still got children born to fail in 2014. The thing I'm frightened about is the consequences of a no vote. There are billboards going up telling us we can get the best of both worlds. We can get more power for Holyrood, and we've got the strength of the big United Kingdom around us as a safety net at the same time. Well, what they're offering in Holyrood is that you'll be able to control 40% of the budget. It doesn't take the village idiot to know that means they control 60% of the budget. That's some deal. And then there's this question of the big, strong United Kingdom. Have you wondered why? You remember the Queen's Jubilee, when she sailed up the Thames in that wee boat, and the Duke of Edinburgh, he's dressed as an admiral of the fleet. Have you ever wondered why? I'll tell you why. Because the United Kingdom is skint. It now has £1.3 trillion worth of debt. The structural deficit in the budget, that is the difference between what it earns and what it spends, is this year £100 billion. In all other jubilees, the monarch has reviewed the fleet. But this is a skint United Kingdom. There's no fleet to review, and that's why she was on that wee boat. Of course, there are risks in an independent Scotland. We might make mistakes, but there's certainty in staying in the United Kingdom. You'll not have heard much of it at the moment, because we're going into the pre-election year, but come the election in 2015 for Westminster, immediately afterwards, there's going to be 25 billion cuts in public expenditure. That's not my invention. Osborne is on the record in saying so, and Balls is on the record in admitting that and implementing it as well. And that's only one 25 billion cuts. There'll be more in order to try and drive down what will then be £1.5 trillion of national debt. That's the certainty if we vote no. Voting yes, I believe there are certain certainties. I'm in this campaign for the grandchildren, but I'm in this campaign for a working class majority in an independent parliament. In October 1974, as the Member of Parliament for South Ayrshire, the same as Willie Ross, the MP for Kilmarnock, we campaigned on the slogan, shifting the balance of wealth and power to the working people and their families. It didn't happen, and it hasn't happened. And the reason is, from a Scottish point of view, the working people in Scotland are a minority inside the United Kingdom. Inside Scotland, we are the majority, and we will have a majority working class parliament inside Holyrood. The working class parliament for the first time ever. What do we do with that power? Because that's what the referendum's about. It's about power, your power, and how it will be used. How do we do it? Well, we start to tackle the fundamental that controls the lives of everybody, including, by the way, the middle class folk. And that fundamental is, if we cannot sell our labour in the labour market, we're in a fix. If we have 40 people chasing one job, or 240 people chasing one job, we are in a very weak bargaining position as a working class person. We take low wages or we take zero contract hours. That's the position. If we have independence and we have the power of the working people represented in a Holyrood Parliament in the majority, we can start to make the labour market work for us, to have employers chase us to take a job, and therefore wages will be much higher. It's another thing. We've 157,000 people on the housing waiting list. That's families who have no home in this country at the present time. How do you cure that? Well, actually, it's no rocket science. You've got to build houses. If you don't build houses, they remain homeless. Then how do we do it? Just think about it. If we start to build 25 to 30,000 houses, new houses a year, somebody's got to quarry the sand, somebody's got to manufacture the cement, somebody's got to make the bricks, somebody's got to transport all that stuff to the site, and you need bricklayers, plumbers, slaters and joiners to actually build a house. And you've created work right along that particular trail. How do you pay for it? Well, Fiona said that the SNP government has done away with PFI. True. But we're left with the legacy of PFI before they became the government. And in the years ahead, we'll be paying £22 billion to the PFI people. They saw us coming and they've been robbing us day and daily. In the city I now live in, Edinburgh, the hospital there pays £56 million to the PFI company before it spends another pound on National Health Service care for patients. Well, it's quite simple. If you have what an Iron Bevan said socialists must have in their armoury, audacity. Audacity to think differently from what the establishment tells you to think, and the audacity to do what they tell you you cannot do. And if we've got a working class parliament in Holyrood, let's bring in the PFI people and say, we'd like to renegotiate the contract. And if they say nothing doing, you say, well, that's all right. We have the legislative power to tax you on your profits, and the money from that we can put into housing. Now, I too am a member of the SNP, but I hope I don't need to vote SNP in 2016. I want to vote for a real Labour Party in 2016. Natalie mentioned the Daily Telegraph. I get it as well. I like to see what the other side are saying. And about 6 weeks ago, Ed Miliband, the leader of the Labour Party, had an article in the Telegraph, calculating, of course, that up here, no very many of us read it. And that article was about Middle England and the great problem they're going through, and that he would make Middle England, that's the middle class in England, his #1 priority. Now, the problem with the Labour Party in Scotland, and I speak from some experience, having been in it, is that we are saddled with Middle England. To win an election south of the border, you have to pander to the needs of Middle England. So no matter what we say up here, when the election's over, it's the Middle England agenda that we get, even if there's a Labour government. Think what happens if we don't need to bother about Middle England. We just need to bother about ourselves, our own needs and our own policies. There should be a transformation of the Labour Party in Scotland once we become independent. There's a number of people in the Labour movement are recognising that more and more as time goes on. They're no like Joanne Lamont. You remember the stairhead fight that took place between Joanne and Natalie? Well, in the middle of it, Joanne said a remarkable thing, and I'm quoting exactly. "We're not genetically programmed in Scotland to make political decisions." That means we're thick. It cannot be any other meaning. All over the world, people are genetically programmed to make decisions, bar us. Well, I've got news for Joanne. I am not genetically programmed to make other than sensible decisions. And there are millions of Scots who are genetically programmed to make the correct decisions on the 18th of September. Now, I want to talk about oil. This is something that's very peculiar in Scotland. We are the only nation in the developed world who ever discovered oil and people in our society got poorer. We're the only people for whom oil is a problem and not an asset. We've been in a prison of lies about oil since the first drop landed on the mainland. Janie Buchan, now dead and gone, was the Labour MEP, a luminary of the party, on television actually said, "It cannot be Scotland's oil because we didn't put it there." Now, I have worked in the Arab world, and I tell my Arab friends this, and they say, "Well, we didn't put it here either, but by James." Most of the debate about oil is about how much we should get from the tax revenues. I want you to think about it slightly differently. What can we actually do with the black stuff itself? Suppose, for example, we have the power, as we would have in independence, to take a proportion, it wouldn't be a big one, because we're not a big country, of that oil as it goes through Grangemouth and produce cheaper petrol, cheaper diesel and cheaper jet fuel for aircraft. Now, think of the economic consequences of that. More money in people's pockets to spend locally. Our transport system would become, in terms of cost, one of the most efficient in the whole of Europe. Our tourist industry, and we got a lot of tourists from the north of England, man, wife, 2 wains, in a car, and the statistics show that not many go above the line Glasgow to Edinburgh because of the cost of fuel going up into the Highlands. Lower that fuel cost and we increase the number of jobs in tourism as well. That's the kind of thing we can do with power. There's oil and gas in the Clyde. I've known about it for years when I was a member of Parliament, but we can never get to it because if you put rigs down in the Clyde, the Trident nuclear submarine can safely navigate. So once it goes, Ayrshire, North Ayrshire and Central Ayrshire will be in a boom time, such as we have not experienced for a very long time since. That's the kind of thing that we can do if we're independent. And also think of this. Think of fairly recent history. The amount of energy the Scottish working class have had to expend in trying to defend our positions. We've had to try and defend against heavy unemployment. Kilmarnock had to try and defend against the Agio. We've had to defend against the poll tax and the bedroom tax and inequality. Think what it would be like if we didn't need to use our energy to defend any longer, but that same energy to build a country we can actually be proud of. The Scottish working people have more talent than they realise. You've been told and I've been told, we're too wee, we're too small, and Joanne Lamont says, too stupid to be able to run our own affairs. It is untrue. We are a talented people. We have an enormous amount of ability inside the working people of Scotland, and when that's released, not to defend but to advance our cause, we can transform the situation in our country for our grandchildren. Now I want to finish by reminding you of something. We are always told that we can't do things that other folk do because we're small. We've got this lassie who's the International Development Secretary down in Westminster, who the Scotsman newspaper, which is very, very neutral of course, had the headline, "Yes vote would harm world's poorest," claims the UK minister. Well, I did write a book, and when I was coming near the end of it, friends told me not to put a section in. They said it'll get mocked, and if that gets mocked, the other sections, people will discount. Well, I put it in. There's 2 aircraft carriers being built up here. One, the Royal Navy can actually put a crew on, no aircraft, but they can put a crew on it. The other one, they don't know what to do with it. They would like to sell it. Probably Argentina would buy it, but they can't sell it to it. I've said in this book, we'll take it. An independent Scotland will take it. And we'll take the use of it, the model of a 16,500 ton ship called the Africa Mercy, which is a hospital ship. Goes to the poorest parts of Africa where there's no medical cover whatsoever. Does 3,300 surgical operations a year. Cleft palates for a weighing, sorts that out. Somebody who can't see, they take the cataract away and they can see again. And just imagine the difference that makes to a child or an adult in a poor African area to have that repair done. Well, I thought, why don't we take the aircraft carrier? Why don't we, instead of sending our young men and women abroad to kill people, as the Scots have done for generations, why don't we make the aircraft carrier into a hospital ship, in which it can go to Africa and Asia? It doesn't carry any weapons. It carries medicine and doctors and nurses and young people who want to help other people. And I would name the aircraft carrier the Robert Burns, after the greatest egalitarian this country has ever produced. And just think of this woman says that we can't do anything for the third world. That actually wouldn't cost an extra penny off the Scottish taxpayer, because we're going to have about expatriated from the Ministry of Defence budget about £2.5 billion into Scotland. It will cost £35 million a year to run that hospital ship. So that money will be already there. Think of the international reputation of this nation if we sent that type of hospital ship into the poorest parts of Africa and Asia. And then we could say to her, don't you believe it, hen, we can do better than you've done before. I'll leave you with this thought. On the 18th of September, between the hours of 7 a.m. and 10 p.m, you and me are sovereign. For the first time in Scottish history, you and me, the people, are sovereign. What do we do during those 15 hours with that sovereignty? What happens at 1 minute past 10? Will we have voted no and given that power and sovereignty away, or will we have voted yes? I believe, without any question, that we will have voted yes and a better future for our young people.
Thanks very much, Jim, and thanks to the guys that provided the mic, because you would never have heard Jim up the back if we didn't have that. But that was 4 great speeches, and I think that's one of the big pluses about the Yes campaign, the diversity of the speakers with a common goal. And we've got a constant fight against the very negative campaign that's against us and a very determined media, so we've got to try our best to stay positive. But in 4 months, we've got the opportunity. We either vote for more austerity or we vote for prosperity. And at the end of that, somebody, maybe 40% of the country, is going to be very disappointed. I think what we need to try and remember is we're all Scots together. We need to get on together after the referendum, but let's make the most of this opportunity and take it. So now it's time, we're going to move on to questions and answers, which is my favourite part of it. The format will be, I don't know if the guys could maybe dull these lights just a tiny wee bit because we can't see the audience at all up here. That would be handy. If you just put your hand up in the air, we don't have any written questions, that's great, thanks. If you put your hand up and if you've got a question, if you really want it, fivers tend to work with me if you wave the fiver, but we'll try and get through them all. And if we don't, the teams will be at the door to try and answer any questions that we don't have time to do. So you'll see the guys in generally the blue shirts and fluorescent things up there. Anybody want to go first? Who's the brave one who'll go for the first question? Up or downstairs makes no difference. The chap there just with the hat on right in the centre, can you get the microphone, or have you got a big loud voice like Jim?
I've been unemployed nearly 30 years. No work a full year in 30 years. I just want to know if the nationalised industry will be everybody a joke.
Okay. Input to that. Jim?
No, we can't nationalise every industry.
Every industry, like the industries that was nationalised before, transport industry, like the buses, shipbuilding, coal mining, there's a lot of industries that was nationalised. They could be nationalised, that would give us jobs, even building houses.
Yeah, well, yes, well, I've already explained how we can actually build houses and start creating jobs for folk doing that particular way. But you take the oil industry, for example. I mean, I've been challenged from the left for not advocating the total nationalisation of the oil industry almost right away. And the reason is that we don't have any knowledge of the oil industry. There's thousands of people work in the oil industry, but they all work in individual rigs, and when they come ashore, they disperse. Whereas previously, if you take shipbuilding, mining, steelworks, these were done in towns and villages where everybody worked together, and therefore was a build-up of knowledge of each of those industries that would allow us to be able to control them. That doesn't apply in the North Sea, because we've been kept in this prison of lies. And when Mrs. Thatcher destroyed the British National Oil Corporation, she did it for 2 reasons. One, she didn't like a public organisation, and secondly, it meant that the window that we had, the public had, on the North Sea to understand it was closed, and we've been kept in ignorance of it. I am advocating the Scottish National Oil Corporation, and also us to take part in the actual oil industry itself to create jobs. One of the things that we can do, for example, and this is very serious, there's a huge amount of decommissioning of oil rigs to come over the next 10 to 20 years. In the first 10 years, between now and the next 10 years, the amount of work, the value of the decommissioning is 10 billion pounds, 10 billion pounds worth of work. Now, if we are independent and have the power, we can tell the companies they will be decommissioned here and the work will be created here. And it's not just unskilled work, there's skilled work and scientific work in that kind of decommissioning. And that is a huge possibility for the creation of jobs. So there is a mix, if you like, of public activity and public action we can take. But there's also some we can do in the private sector. We've got 340,000 small, medium-sized enterprises in Scotland. They actually account for almost 98% of the Scottish economy. Biggest problem they have is they cannot get credit. They cannot get money to expand their work. One of the lassies that I know in Edinburgh, she really needs about 30,000 in order to expand and bring on somebody else. She can't get that money. There's no bonus in 30,000. I tell her to phone up and ask them for 30 million. And I said to her, you'll get an interview, definitely, but you maybe not get the money. But if we can create a special bank for the small, medium-sized enterprises, a bank that understands them, and it's a national bank we're talking about, then if only half of them, of that 340,000, created one good paying job, then we're on the way to curing our unemployment problem. And it's that kind of idea that we've got to actually bring in to action as soon as we're independent. Being independent, step one. Step two is what we do here.
Jim talked earlier on about defending Scotland. One of the things we're going to have to do immediately is defend Scotland against privatisation of Royal Mail, and that's one of the areas in terms of renationalisation. It's got to be about job creation, because that's what we want to give an opportunity for as many folk as possible so they stay in Scotland and our talented folk don't have to leave. And in the areas, if I give you an example, the Scottish economy currently in the government is trying to focus on 7 key economic sectors. We've got energy, life sciences, we've got food and drink, we've got we've got 7 of them. Only 3 of those are the same priority as the Westminster government. So when the Westminster government is operating, trying to support industries internationally and exports, they're not concentrating on Scottish firms and on the sectors we need to help job creation. And Jim's right about looking at the base of Scotland's economy. We have a big base of small and medium-sized enterprises. Many of them could and should be able to develop with more experts. We underperform as a country compared to other similar-sized European countries in being able to get more income from exporting our goods and services. So making sure that there was the lending capacity for those to have access to capital will help. But that's what has to come from. I represent the Lisco constituency. We had mining, a bit like, obviously, in Ayrshire. We had the Polkemmet mines, Whitburn, Armadale, Broxburn, and that area. We then had British Leyland, and it went. And then the big thing was to bring in, to bring all the foreign investment jobs, NEC and Motorola, and they went and they closed. And the reason we can succeed is by believing and having faith in the small companies that we have. Yes, we'll welcome inward investment, but we've got to do it ourselves. So when we develop that new renewable energy, we want to make sure that the turbines are made in Scotland, that the technology is made in Scotland. And that's the opportunity that we have. But we can only incentivise and make these things happen if we've got the levers of power over tax and the economy and investment, and that's where we can get jobs from. And that's why, with the limited powers we have, we've tried to make sure we've invested in capital to build the hospitals and the schools and indeed housing, but not on the level that we can or could do were we independent. That's the opportunity, and that's where job creation can come from.
Patrick?
There's a much bigger role that could be played by public ownership, local ownership and community ownership of industry in Scotland, as the questioner suggests. But there's something really weird going on at the moment in the UK and in Scotland with the attitude to public ownership right across the political spectrum, from left to right. Maybe it's something that Natalie and David could resolve at the breakfast table one day, because whether you're left-wing or right-wing, what we've got at the moment is a political culture where we nationalise things that are failing, things that are losing money, like the banks that failed us so catastrophically. Just recently, Prestwick Airport as well. It's losing money, it's failing, and we nationalise it. Things that are profitable, things that are making money, Royal Mail's a good example. East Coast Rail is a good example. Making money again, run in the public sector after failures in the private sector. Those are the things that we're handing back to the private sector. So things that make money, we're willing to give away, and things that lose money, we're underwriting with taxpayers' money. Now that shouldn't make any sense whether you're left-wing or right-wing, and I don't think it makes any sense for Scotland. I am a wee bit cautious, though, about the idea of simply renationalising industries, because I'm going to disagree with something and agree with something from Jim here on this one, because let's take the oil industry as one example. You're not going to be very surprised that I disagree with some of Jim's comments about the oil industry. The oil industry around the world is valued on the basis of its reserves. How much fossil fuel do they have in the ground? Existing reserves. And we know that the world has got probably 4 or 5 times more fossil fuel than we can afford to burn. So what you're looking at there is a bubble. Stranded assets. Assets that are not worth what they look like on paper. If we were to take that into public ownership, or if we were to take the energy companies that currently operate coal-fired power stations into public ownership, we would end up carrying the can when they fall over. I say let the private sector hang on to something that's about to fall over. Let's invest for the future in the 21st century industries, the 21st century technologies that are going to pay dividends in the future, rather than thinking that we need to take responsibility for the private sector failures to come. And there is a new economic model already coming into existence, not just here, but around the world. One that's based on sustainability, one that's based on renewable resources, one that's based on the interactions between people, not the dependency on a handful of big businesses. Finally, the point where I agree very strongly with Jim is that we cannot find the resources to invest in those new developing emerging economies, those new developing emerging industries, without reform of the banking sector. I don't want to have domination of the banking sector by a handful of vast players in the way that the UK has. I want the kind of diverse, rich ecology of banking that some other European countries enjoy, where they do have big commercial banks, but they've also got small banks, local banks, municipals, co-ops, credit unions, and all banks have a legal duty to invest in the real economy, not to focus on the casino economy that failed so catastrophically. So if we have that kind of banking system, then we've got the ability to invest in the real economy, but in the emerging new economy that will serve us well for the future and provide lasting, sustainable, rewarding jobs.
Any more?
That's not it.
Chap in the front there, please. There's the mic coming there if you want to just wait a second, please. There you go. You can put your hands up at any time and I'll nod to you if it'll keep the questions going if you're happy with that.
In relation to Patrick Harvie's point about job creation and nationalisation, this would mean taxes do have to go up or just be reconstructed in a different model. This has to happen, and if we are going to vote yes, we have to decide what government want to lead. I don't think the SNP will actually go with that because they've already said they wanted to cut corporate tax. Don't know how outdated that is, but I've not heard any change to that. This obviously is a must. He's already said they want to. I've heard that in an interview with Patrick Harvie.
Was she not told about that earlier on?
Slap her.
Okay. Do you want me to kick off first? I think in terms of job creation, there's different ways you can do it. What we've set out in the white paper is an incentive that would actually encourage people, one, to invest more and locate here, and in terms of the opportunities that can provide, and also in terms of getting the tax take from increased investment, productivity, etc., from that model. Now, other people will put other models together. One of the important things to set out, and it's really important for the referendum, is when you vote, and I think I'm hopeful that you will vote yes in September 18th, there'll be an 18-month period where the preparations, negotiations, all the aspects that will need to take place can take place. And then in March 2016, the legal powers for independence will be transferred fully and completely, which means that you then are entitled to vote for the independent government you want in the next Scottish Parliament elections in May 2016. Now, in the white paper, we've set out as the government what our prospectus is for job creation, for investment, to ensure greater returns to the Scottish Exchequer from the resources that we have, current resources, but also from job creation using incentives for tax and other areas. And we show it can work. If you take Kilmarnock, it's a good example. Kilmarnock Town Centre has benefited a huge amount from a number of things. One of it is the Culture Secretary, some of the investment in the streets that are around here in terms of the heritage grants and helping the shop fronts, all the rest of it, but also in reducing the business burden for small businesses, as we said, very important. And that helps them take on one other person or two other persons and stay on the high street. And that's what's happened in Scotland. Although there's a real risk in many areas, we've managed to keep small businesses going in many regards because of the reduction and sometimes the abolition of business rates for those businesses. You've got to use it wisely, you've got to use it sensibly. It's not going to increase taxes to do that, and what we're trying to do is increase the tax take. But what I will say is other parties that are stand in the elections in May 2016 will have other models. The difference is you get to decide which one of those you like. And the difference with independence, if you don't like what an independent government can do, you can vote it out. If you don't like what a Westminster government do, you're going to have to hope and rely and cross your fingers that somebody else will. I think the first point.
You're right that I've argued against cuts in corporation tax. I will argue against cuts in corporation tax in a Scottish election or in a UK election. We've seen about 30 years of constant corporation tax cuts from the Tory government, from the Labour government, from the coalition government. It's been a pretty smooth graph, actually. Corporation tax cuts going down and down and down, whether under the Thatcher government, the Blair government, or the new coalition. You can barely tell that there was a change of government. It's been the same policy, and I don't want to see more of the same in an independent Scotland. Just today, we saw further news about Amazon. Amazon doing something like £4.3 billion worth of business in the UK alone, and paying less than 0.1% of that sum in corporation tax. I think that's a scandal. I think that's a global scandal, but it's also a national scandal. And it's only if countries start to cooperate that they can close those corporation tax loopholes rather than competing with each other to offer lower corporation tax levels. That's the only way that we'll do it. We often hear Scotland compared to other small northern European countries, some of the Scandinavian countries. And yes, they have a higher level of taxation overall. They've also got higher wages for most people. They've also got a much more generous welfare state. And they're happy with that deal. They tend to like that model. It has huge benefits in terms of a more equal society, a better provision of social goods, public services and welfare state. That's the kind of option I would like to see. Right now, we've got a situation where ordinary people on ordinary incomes, whether in work or out of work, are often paying a higher proportion of their income in overall taxation than the wealthiest people. That needs to be reversed, and we need to start seeing the wealthy individuals and the wealthy corporations paying their way, which they've been failing to do for decades.
Natalie?
I was at a meeting the other day and we were talking about this, and a few really good points from the audience. Part of the problem with the UK tax system and the reason that so many corporations manage to avoid paying tax here is because there are over 1,000 pages of the tax system, which makes it very, very easy for clever lawyers and QCs to find their way about it. Now, make no mistake, these corporations have the best lawyers and the best QCs to work their way around it. And I think we can talk about what the level of corporation tax is going to be in an independent Scotland, and I take on board some of what Patrick said there. I'm not necessarily in favour, despite being in the SNP, of lowering that. I'd like to see the arguments for both, but I'd like to see that robust. I'd like to see it be very robustly argued in the first independent Scottish elections. But what I would like to see is that the taxation system that we design is not a taxation system which allows loopholes. And instead of having a taxation system that makes exemptions here, there and everywhere, we have a more holistic, which includes everything, and then we start looking around. And so actually it catches all, because you know, and I know, if we weren't paying our taxes off our wages, we would be caught. And I don't want an independent Scotland either to allow big business to take money out of the country. Now, Apple pay corporation tax. They don't pay corporation tax in Scotland. They pay corporation tax, or in the rest of the UK, they pay in Ireland. In countries like New Zealand, where they have much easier systems of taxation to understand, it is less easy for them to escape the burden of paying their taxation system. But I take the point that Patrick made, that I think there is an onus on governments across the world actually to look at this, and some of the things under that are like the Robin Hood tax, etc. I think we need to work, we're a global market, we're a global economy, and we have to be responsible in a global community, and I think that means working together as countries, and that's one thing perhaps we as an independent Scotland could lead on and put on the agenda.
We've got a couple of questions from upstairs. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is actually about the Yes and No campaigns. Like myself, I was in the Yes campaign. There's quite a lot of folk, probably knows there's quite a lot of scaremongering about the No campaign. The other day I was actually asked a question, or I was actually accused by one of my friends of scaremongering myself. And it's a question I can't actually answer, and I wondered if I can. And both Fiona and Natalie talked about it. They talked about the what brand, or the Barnett formula, or whatever. And the question I've got, as this is coming from a Yes campaign activist, is that what evidence can I show somebody who's undecided or a no voter that if Scotland votes no, Scotland's block grant will definitely get reduced? That's the question I can't answer. Or maybe the Yes campaign itself hasn't highlighted this enough to people. A lot of people seem to think we don't like Yes. Well, we're a bit undecided, but because we don't like Yes, we just vote no because we'll get the same as we got before. I don't think we're wrong, but I can't prove that. Is that understandable?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Do you want me to?
Yep.
I'll kick off. I mean, Jim talked about the statements by both George Osborne and Ed Balls about the reduction and the public spending cuts overall. A significant amount of that will quite clearly be in areas where, in education, health, other areas that then have a knock-on effect for us and the Barnett formula. When I was in London last week speaking at a Wales in London event, and it's been quite clear from the Welsh, imagine from the Welsh perspective looking what's happened here, and they're absolutely clear, and indeed statements from political parties and politicians at Westminster, that they would want to see, if should there be a no vote, a renegotiation of the Barnett formula. And a renegotiation of the Barnett formula. Remember those people that said somehow Scotland's subsidy junkies? Now bear in mind, over the past 5 years, Scotland has contributed £8.3 billion more per head of population than the rest of the UK. That's £1,600 for every single person in this room and elsewhere. So we're more than paying our own way. However, there are people who like the argument that those Scots have got above themselves, and therefore, should they vote no, what we're going to do is get our hands on the Barnett formula and then say to them, OK, we'll claw that back. Now, that's not just coming from the Westminster politicians. All the political parties, including Plaid Cymru, who we're in agreement with in Westminster, for their own purposes, want to see the Barnett formula reopened. And I can be absolutely certain in terms of the politics of this. Do you really think after a no vote that the Westminster politicians looking at this are going to somehow be benign and say, by the way, we're going to increase it? So for those two reasons, one, we know from both the parties that are likely to be form a government, either Conservative or Labour, in a future Westminster government, that they're going to cut public spending. The figure that Jim talked about is the 25 billion overall. Some of that would have consequences for us. And also the politics of this, we know there's been calls from MPs from all parties that they would want to reopen that. So I think that is a big problem for us. And I was only at school, at the same school as Jim went to in 1979, when I was still at school. And I remember then they were saying, vote no and we'll give you a better deal. Scotland, at the end of the day, voted yes, but they had the 40% rule. And what did we end up with? We didn't get any more powers, we didn't get a Scottish Parliament, and it took to 1997 to get it. Remember the lessons of the past.
Another question just along, Alistair, thanks.
Hi, Gordon Walker. I've campaigned for independence most of my life from various parties, including parties that were socialist. One of the things that really upsets me is there seems to be a consensus not to mention the real poverty and suffering that many families in Kilmarnock are going through, trying to tackle power bills. It's an injustice in my belief that the poorest people are asked to pay through power meters and pay the highest rate per unit of electricity. It's absolutely shocking. How much does legislation from Europe, I would just like to ask, prevent the Scottish Government investing in one of my ideas, which I've put to the local MSP, in a social organised business that specifically aims to reduce prices for the poorest people? As I'm sure we could turn our minds to subsidising electricity for the poor and the unemployed and the elderly, as it happens in other semi-socialist economies throughout the world.
Okay.
And how much is there a battle for what we want in Scotland being slightly, if not greatly, limited by the regulation of Europe on common rules throughout Europe?
Yep, thank you. Patrick?
I think the problem lies more with the regulation of the UK energy market than it does with the European Union. There are opportunities right now, even in a devolved context, to do some things. I've argued for local public energy companies to be established. Now, some local councils are doing this already, not many. There's a great deal more that we could do in this area where you use local council resources, including borrowing powers. Local councils have got the borrowing powers that John Swinney doesn't have at the moment. You know, the Scottish Government should have the ability to borrow, but right now it doesn't. Local councils could be borrowing to invest in the kind of highly energy efficient housing. That means people need to pay very little to keep their houses warm and to have all of their energy needs met. Local publicly owned renewables, that could be heat pumps, it could be wind, it could be solar. There's a range of different technologies that all work and can again bring people an income rather than just an energy bill. And the money that you save from that can either service the debt, so you pay back the debt that you borrowed, or you can invest in the wider building stock and start reducing people's bills that way. So there is stuff that we could be doing right now. With independence, we could join those local energy companies up and create a national energy company that could do it on an even bigger scale. But there are things like the payment meters. You're absolutely right. We could be changing that only if we can change the regulation of the electricity market. Standing charges is another one. We've been campaigning to remove the standing charges, because if you've got standing charges on your bill, that means you're paying, even if you're a really low energy user, even if you've got a very small house, you're very careful with it because you're worried about that bill and you're only heating one room at a time, you're still paying the same standing charge that somebody with a much higher energy use is paying. So that again makes it a less fair system. So we do need to be able to regulate the energy market differently and to change the relationship so that we're not so dependent on a handful of vast, again, it's about this domination of a handful of vast players in the market, just as what I was saying with banking. But there's a great deal that we could be doing right now as well. We need to have the political will to do it as well as the powers.
Jim?
One of the difficulties the Holyrood Parliament and government has that's not fully understood, sometimes I think by themselves, is that 90% of the block grant they get is already pre-committed by statute. They have to pay the health service, the fire brigade, the police and all the rest of it, and when you tot it up, it comes to about 90% of the budget, leaving them with only about 10% for discretionary payments, which doesn't give them a great deal of scope under devolution. Independence, it really depends on the ideological policy you implement. I mean, I'm a socialist, and I would say, well, okay, I can't nationalise the energy company at the moment because we have to pay compensation, and I'd rather use the money elsewhere to do that. But I'll bring in a new energy law, and that new energy law will give the Scottish Government, on behalf of the public, 15% of the company. Company law will be changed from the directors having their prime responsibility to the shareholders and profit to their prime responsibility being to the public interest. And also there will be 2 levels of electricity charges. One will be based on 2 rooms and a kitchen and a bathroom and a living room, and that will guarantee a certain price for that level of demand for that during the year. And if anybody else wants to stay in an 8 apartment, 9 apartment, 10 apartment, then you'll pay above that premium rate. That would mean that for the lowest paid workers, as we start to rebuild the economy, and for the pensioners, they would get a rate of charge which would be much lower than they're getting at the present time. It is really a question of whether we remain trapped inside the mental apparatus we have at the present time of how things are constructed, or if we're prepared to turn it upside down. I'm prepared to turn it upside down.
Okay, thanks very much. Just wanted to quickly say that I don't know if you thought about this before, but the professional people take a long time to set these kind of things up, and I just want to say that the local guys that are around the hall tonight, they've done a really fantastic job as amateurs, because they've done a cracking job, so I just want to say well done to them. And on your way out, if you do want to join in to the campaign, they're a great team. If you don't want to knock doors, you want to give leaflets out, if it's an hour a week, please sign up and help them on their road with this. Would be much appreciated, I'm sure, by the team at Yes East Ayrshire. They're really easy to pick out, that's one thing for sure. Okay, have we any more questions before? There's a gentleman there in the white shirt, if we could, Neil, if you could catch him. And then, and then David up the back. Yeah. Okay.
My name's Ricky Rowe, I'm a father of 3. Just a wee quick anecdote actually. My father moved up here in the late 1940s after being evacuated from London. He lived in Oxfordshire, moved up here, and to be perfectly honest with you, would never ever countenance the prospect of breaking up this United Kingdom, something that he loved to the core. 6 months ago I asked him, Dad, will you just consider the prospect, look on the internet, because that's the best place. You won't find the Daily Record or the Sunday Mail, which is what you probably read. I thought that would be really difficult for him. Not because it's hard to find this information on the internet, but because my mum is a fanatical online bingo fanatic. But 6 months ago, he did take that opportunity to look on there, and 3 weeks ago, my dad told me that he was voting yes. I wanted to ask the man, as the father of 3, what would be your overriding message to the youth of today? My 2 sons will be voting for the very first time in their life, and it's a big ask for these kids. What's the overriding message of opportunity that yes will bring to my kids and you?
So your dad's, does your mum win? Your dad's won, did your mum ever win in the bingo?
A couple of times, yeah.
Good, okay. Okay. Can we take it quickly from Patrick right along?
one of the most exciting things about this referendum actually is votes at 16, and it's not just because I think it's a good idea. It's prompted loads of schools to get in panels of politicians to engage with young voters on both sides of the debate. I've been into more schools in the last 6 months or so than I have for years put together as an MSP, and I think you'll find politicians on both sides. The thing I try to get across to those young voters is not just that this is a lucky generation that's got the chance to make this decision. I try to tell them as well about the generation after the Second World War that your dad was a part of, because there was a country which was economically beaten up, physically beaten up, emotionally beaten up by that experience, but they decided not to retreat into their shell. They decided we got through it together, we fought together, we survived together, we're going to rebuild together, and they did something really transformational and lasting, building a welfare state to be proud of, building a national health service to be proud of, putting the ideas of social solidarity into practice, and for 30 odd years after that, they started to close the gap between rich and poor, and ordinary people got a larger share of the national income as a result of that. Well, that legacy is being torn apart right now. That legacy is being torn apart right now. And we had to say to young people, not just that Scotland's got resources, that Scotland could be better, but that we've got confidence in them to be the generation that can be every bit as transformational as the post-war generation was in the UK. That they've got the capacity, that they've got the skills and the creativity and the imagination to make the best of it. This is, if it's about anything, it's about confidence. And we have to say to young people, we've got the confidence in your generation to make a better go of it than we made of it.
I suppose, briefly, it's three things. One is, with independence, you can create your own future. Secondly, I've got an 18-year-old that's left home this year, and she knows what it's like to stand on her own 2 feet. And it's a bit about self-respect and independence. She doesn't want to be dependent on me for the rest of her life. So it's about self-respect and individuality. And I think that's something important. We can keep the social ties, but we've got that independence of being able to be responsible for ourselves. And I think young people can understand that. And thirdly, and it is reflecting on what Patrick has said, I think there is something, I'm not saying that other countries don't have a sense of social justice and fairness, but interestingly, I think this country does, for some reason, have a real sense of what's fair and what's right. And of all people, our young people have a real sense of what's fair and what's right. And I'm going to quote William McIlvanney, known to this town, who has been up at the Liverpool Book Festival, and he said the same remark when he was at the book festival in my hometown. And he said, people think that Scotland's national motto is "Whar dar meddle with me." It's really, hey, that's no fair. And I think that is, and so therefore, if we're going to make that fair, just society, that I think people of all generations feel strongly about, but our young people resonate, then they can be part of creating that future that gives us responsibility, but gives us fairness as well.
Natalie?
Yeah. Well, I'm 32. I hope you don't think I look it, but anyway, I'm 32, and a couple of months ago I got a phone call from The Guardian, and they were doing a feature which was in the paper at the weekend about young people in politics. And I really tried to dissuade them from using me, because at 32, I'm twice the age of people that can vote in this referendum, so I was a bit mortified to be featured in there alongside 18 and 19-year-olds and 17-year-olds. And I think one of the reasons being that I too go into schools like Patrick, and I speak to young people, and I'm inspired by people that are in the Generation Yes group who are campaigning along with their peers for independence, and I missed that by 2 years. When I turned 18, it was the first year of the Scottish Parliament. When I went to university, I paid student tuition fees. I came out of university with £17,000 of debt, which I'm currently paying off. Now, the generation that we have now don't have student tuition fees, and that is to be applauded for all stripes of the Scottish Government. And that allows people to go to university, or young people to go to university if they can. I also don't want to see university as being held up there as this is the only ideal for our young people, because it's not right for every single young person. We need to look at the education system to ensure that people are supported to go to colleges and for different futures. That might not necessarily be as academic, but maybe in skills and training. And I think young people have a unique voice to tell us what actually they need from the future to build the future. And I don't think we should all be sitting here as politicians. Well, I'm not a politician, but people sitting on a stage telling young people what it is that they need for their future. We want them to tell us. But I think for me, the most exciting thing about independence is that for my generation, we feel very much excluded from the world. The world is a global stage, yet we don't have the languages or the confidence in ourselves to go to Europe and to take the jobs in the European Union and to go across the world, to be in Foreign Commonwealth Office. The world is a small place, and I would like to see young people in Scotland take the opportunity to go into Europe, to go into the world and feel the same level of confidence as our European neighbours. And I think that way we bring jobs into our community and we bring the world into us and we show where we are in the world stage.
Did you get that call from the Guardian, Jim?
No. But I am meeting the Daily Telegraph tomorrow morning. I would say to young people of 16 that in a sense, yes, you are different from other age groups, but in a sense you're not. When you pick up that paper, small piece of paper on the 18th of September, you're the same as everybody else. You have power over yourself and over your country. And you have a degree of responsibility which you cannot avoid by saying I'm only 16. You have a degree of responsibility to everybody else in the country. Old people, people who are disabled, people who are unemployed, people who are poor, and we've got to get them out of that particular poverty trap. And I would say to them that you're very, very lucky with that piece of paper, because you've got a chance to create a better future, not just for yourself, but for everybody else, and a better future than your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents had in the past. Because the thing that I want to see removed by independence is the terrible insecurity that has haunted the working class all the days of my life.
Quickly finish off. At the moment, we're looking at the prospect that the next generation, uniquely in the last few decades, could be poorer than their parents and their grandparents, with tuition fees, with the NHS being eroded in areas of England, with the working age going up. And I think that it's time our youth and us on their behalf turned round and said, no, we've worked too hard to have the future generation have less than we do in a country with our wealth and our talent and our resources.
Thank you, Natalie. We'll get time for about a couple more, so we'll go here, all up the back, and we'll try our best. If we don't answer your questions, some of the guys, myself, will be waiting outside. We'll do our best, but right up the top corner.
At the moment, after work is 67, that's taking youngins off the work. So folk retire at 65, that means that young folk can get jobs. So what's the Scottish Government going to do for the age to stay at 67 or go up to 70 to retire?
Okay. And that's one of the areas that's set out in Scotland's Future in the white paper in terms of what we can do. We would certainly try and look at the pension age, because there's no need for Scotland in terms of what we can afford for people to have to work to 67. We think that we would be able to make sure that extension doesn't happen in Scotland, and we would put a halt on that as part of one of the first things that we can do. We'd also set up an independent commission looking at pensions and what we need to do. And it's the sort of thing you can do as a nation, is to think, we can't think about pensions just in the short term. It's obviously got to be a long-term thing. Other countries that have dealt with their pensions policies have taken that longer term review as a nation together and looked and get everybody, all parties on side to identify where they go forward. Before I was elected to the Scottish Parliament in 1999, I worked in financial services and pensions, and at those points there was debates about having a flexible age of retirement. Just now everybody's either it's having to go up, and they need a concern about the value of pensions. And I think we need to have a sensible pension policy that, one, we can afford and we can deliver, but also doesn't have people, working far beyond either their physical capabilities or indeed their capacity to do that job. But one of the first things is to make sure we don't have to go to 67. That's what's set out in the white paper. But I think there's bigger issues about how we have that flexibility to make sure that we have a kind of life where you don't just work till you drop, and you don't, when you're living in terms of your 30s, 40s, 50s, work the hours that people have to work without having a sensible family life balance. And if you look at some of the countries in the Scandinavian countries in particular, I was in Finland more recently, they have a far healthier attitude to employment and work. But that means we have to get off the system of poverty wages. We have to make sure we're increasing wages to make sure we can have that lifestyle. That also brings in more tax take. That allows us to invest back in childcare. But pensions is one of the big areas that we can tackle in a system that suits Scotland and doesn't suit the provisions in Westminster currently. So that's one of the things we can offer as part of the white paper.
Now, I've noticed we've not had many questions from ladies, so I've got two, and we'll finish off. There's a lady here just in the second row, and there's a lady with her hand up there. If you don't mind, I know I said I'd go to the back corner. I'm sorry, I'll try and get your questions after the thing. Can we get a mic right down the front, please? Thanks, Andrew. Second row, right in the middle there, that lady there. Thank you. Thanks, Andrew.
Very much I'd like to make the comment. I see a yes vote as a vote to empower the people of Scotland. But where's the power of independence if you're going to have the pen, we need the Bank of England with the power to set interest rates, for example?
Anybody want that? Patrick?
Well, I'm probably leaning in your direction. I think I'm in this to see different economic policy in Scotland. Economic policy that's fit for the 21st century, economic policy that's fit for social justice, for sustainability. That's very different from the economic policy that I think the UK government would allow Scotland to run if it hangs on to those levers of control. I think it's entirely possible that the UK government would be willing to negotiate a currency deal. They said that they won't, but I think it's entirely possible that in the cold light of day, if there's a yes vote, they would be willing to sit down and negotiate. But I think they would attach so many strings to that deal that, frankly, even Mr Salmond and Mr Swinney might balk and think again. I think, if we want to exercise different economic policy, we need real control over macroeconomic choices, over the amount that we borrow, the amount that we invest, the amount that we tax, the amount that we spend. And for me, I think that seems pretty unlikely within the constraints of a currency deal. So I'd like to see Scotland at least doing the groundwork and figuring out what is the transition that would be necessary to create a Scottish currency, one that gives us genuine economic control of the really big choices that matter.
Jim?
Well, I'm for an independent Scottish currency, and I'll tell you why. If we have a currency union with the Bank of England, you have to examine how the English economy is developing. 87% of all the construction cranes inside the United Kingdom are now located in London and the South East. That is developing into a mini-state on its own. And that mini-state has enormous influence on the Bank of England.
Absolutely.
Who determines the interest rates? The Monetary Policy Committee. It's made up of 9 people, 5 from the bank and 4 external, nominated by the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Every one of them is an Oxbridge-educated person. Only one of them has any experience outside the southern part of England. And do we really believe that one joke sent from Edinburgh to there is going to have any real influence on them, given the power and the influence that's invested by that new development that's taking place in London and the South East. So I don't see any great advantage for us. If we have a separate currency, it will actually be underpinned very strongly, because there is a difference between the Scottish economy and the United Kingdom economy. The United Kingdom economy is permanently in a balance of payments and balance of trade deficit. Always been the case. Scotland, on the other hand, would have a balance of trade surplus, very, very large, taking account of the oil, the whisky, and all the things that we export. If you export more than you import, you bring in foreign currency, yen, euros, dollars, sterling. So our pound will be underpinned by very substantial amounts of foreign currency. It wouldn't be a weak currency. And if we're sensible, we would, in the transitional stages, as we develop our own economy, fix it 1-to-1 with the pound sterling. So there'll be no problems trading north and south of the border. And if you think about it just now, we've got Scottish pound notes that trade 1-to-1 with sterling at the present time, sometimes called the Clydesdale, Royal Bank and Bank of Scotland. The important thing is that having our own currency gives us sovereignty. We decide what our interest rates are going to be. It would be a sovereign decision to link to sterling, and it would be a sovereign decision to de-link to sterling when it suits our particular economic purpose. I'm not voting for independence on the 18th of September to have the Bank of England determine what's going to happen to my economy. I don't. Bear in mind, that's SNP policy. Now, I'm not insulting Fiona when I say this. That's SNP policy. That's not necessarily the policy that we're going to get, because this isn't an election on the 18th of September, it's a referendum.
Fiona?
I absolutely acknowledge the different views and opinions of what Scotland can do. Taking the balance of payments point, I mean, that is absolutely crucial in terms of undermining and underlining the arguments here. If you underline the arguments in terms of Scotland's strengths, our trading, and that's why I mentioned in my speech all the different other areas. If you add oil as a bonus on top of that, that means in terms of our economic strength, our balance of payments, we're in a strong position. Now that also is why one of the reasons in terms of self-interest that the rest of the UK, it's in their interest to have a currency union with us. We also have a share in the Bank of England. It's part of the assets that we would have a share of. And remember, the Bank of England currently holds a third of that £1.3 trillion debt that the UK have. In terms of looking at the different options, that's exactly what the Fiscal Commission that the SNP government set up has done. It's an independent commission. It's got two world-leading Nobel laureate economists looking at it. They looked at different options. They looked at the euro. We obviously want to discount that in the current circumstances, certainly. In terms of our own separate currency, they also looked at that. They looked at sterlingisation, as in terms of shadowing sterling, and they also looked at a currency union. The Independent Fiscal Commission is recommending to us that the route we go down is a currency union, and that's what's set out in detail in terms of the white paper and all the other areas. I think it is going to be the best option for Scotland going forward, bearing in mind that all the other areas, the macroeconomic areas, the taxation areas, all the other engines of economic growth will be with us and not with the rest of the UK. But I know that this is one of the contested areas that people want to discuss, but I would recommend those that are really interested in the currency aspects to take a look at the Independent Fiscal Commission's view on all those different options, because the work has been done in looking at them, and we're accepting what the conclusion is, and the independent world-leading economists are recommending to us that their proposal is to have that currency union.
I've read it, I just disagree with it. I recognise the SNP's right to put forward its own policy. They're the government, they've got a majority, they've got a right to put forward their own policy. But I would just invite us all to remember that world-leading economists over the last decade or so are showing themselves capable of mistakes.
Never. Right, we'll come, Natalie, just briefly, and then we've got one final question. And for them that didn't get their question, the Yes East Ayrshire team have got social networking, Facebook, Twitter. You can ask on there, or you can get us outside. And I don't mean that for a fight, I mean for a...
I think that the best thing about the Yes campaign and being part of it, and I mean, I'm an SNP member as well, but I'm here speaking on behalf of Women for Independence. We don't have really any policy positions because we want to be very inclusive. But the diversity of opinion is something that is brilliant to see, and it's this kind of imagining of the future of Scotland from different perspectives that is perhaps the best thing that's happened as part of the referendum. For example, who would have thought on a Monday night people would be so engaged in what's going on in their country that they came along here, where I was in Ullapool a few weeks ago, there was 11% of the whole town turned up from areas around there. And so there's a huge reimagining going on. I don't think anything is prescriptive. Yes, the Scotland's Future book is well researched, etc. Remember, there were four other potential currency arrangements in there. I've been to quite a few lectures at Edinburgh University, at the Royal Society of Economics, and I can hear the benefits of all of them. But I think what's really important to remember is the white paper is there, but it's only one vision of independence. I share much of it, and I think that actually across the board there are lots of things to be admired in it. But that's more policy as well. It shows how independence can happen. It shows how we can make it work. But at the same time, we're going to be voting for a different government in 2016. The SNP can set out their stall on the basis of that, but you'll have other visions. What independence is about is it isn't about policy, it's about power and it's about democracy. And so we shouldn't allow anything to be prescriptive on what we can do, because independence is about what we decide as a country, and we take the powers and we make the change. And if we don't like it, then we look and we look again. But it means that if we don't like it, we can vote it out.
Thank you. The lady with her hand up, Andrew, there. And just while we're waiting on the mic to go along there, I just wanted to say a big thanks to the team who've worked really hard to put this together tonight. The Palace staff as well, who've been excellent. Our excellent speakers, and of course you guys for coming along tonight. Much appreciated, so thanks very much. The lady just in the middle there is very patient.
I actually don't have a question. I actually have a plea to everybody who's undecided and perhaps a no voter. Something that Jim said really struck with me. I was that grandchild at 6 years old at Prestwick Airport heading to my papa because Massey Ferguson shut and I was sent to Canada. Yeah. And we spent 17 years in Canada thinking about when we were going to come back. And my parents both became SNP members in Canada because our family was fractured. I was the first grandchildren out of nearly 40 grandchildren. My dad was the eldest of 9. And my family was completely torn apart because of what happened in Kilmarnock with Massey Ferguson's. I don't want my children to have to go somewhere else because we said no. I want my children to be able to grow up here and actually create a Scotland that's equal with opportunity. It's not funny being that grandchild and having to leave your country because of the situation here. So please think about it before you put pen to paper.
Thanks once again, everybody, for coming along. And does anybody want to put a last word in?
I think she said it.
Yeah, fair enough. Thanks very much for coming along tonight. Hope you've enjoyed it.